With the impeachment vote against the president coming in less than 24 hours, the mood is getting tense as more ruling party lawmakers are expected to join the opposition to oust him this time. The vote will take place at 4 p.m. tomorrow. The country's finance ministry is specifying concerns over the dampening of economic sentiment in its first report released since the recent political turmoil. As Nobel Week 2024 comes to a close, we have highlights of this special week where author Kang became a pioneer in Korean literature. It's December 13th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. The high-stakes second impeachment motion against the president will be put to a vote tomorrow. While the opposition continues to stand unified to support the motion, the ruling party appears divided. Our correspondent Lee Si-hoo starts us off.
How will the National Assembly decide this Saturday? To sway the result yet up in the air, the rival parties scrambled to give their last push Friday, the day before the second scheduled vote on President Yoon's impeachment. The opposition reported to the plenary session the motion to impeach the president for violating his duty to safeguard the Constitution in its declaration of martial law on December 3rd. In his final push, the DP leader Lee Jae-myung said a new chapter will be written in South Korea's history this Saturday and urged the ruling party lawmakers to join the opposition in their efforts.
Impeachment is the fastest, most certain way to end this chaos. Please join us in voting for impeachment tomorrow. History will remember your decision.
This while internal disputes shake the ruling People Power Party, with its leader Han Dong-un and his close allies standing firm on Yoon's impeachment since the president's public address on Thursday, and the new floor leader Kwon Sung-dong arguing the party consensus at the moment is to turn down the impeachment. Kwon did add, however, that the party members will have a candid discussion before making the final decision.
We will decide on the final party consensus at tomorrow's party meeting based on the opinions of our 108 lawmakers.
So far, at least 7 ruling party members have spoken openly of their will to vote for impeachment. This is just one short of the 8 needed from the PPP for the motion to pass, in addition to full support from the 192-member opposition. The PPP will hold an internal meeting on Saturday morning to finalize their consensus before the vote. But whether its members will adhere to the decision of the party in the anonymous vote remains uncertain as public pressure mounts. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Up next, our Choi Soo-hyung walks us through tomorrow's voting procedure at Parliament.
On Thursday, all lawmakers from the 6 opposition parties again jointly submitted an impeachment motion against President Yoon to the National Assembly. According to the National Assembly Act, a vote on the motion must take place between 24 and 72 hours after being reported to the plenary session. The opposition has scheduled the vote for Saturday at 4 p.m. For the impeachment motion to pass, at least 2/3 of the 300 lawmakers must approve it. Currently, there are 199 lawmakers, including 7 from the ruling People Power Party, who support the motion to impeach the president. This means at least one more vote is needed from the ruling People Power Party for the motion to pass. 192 lawmakers from the opposition bloc are also still in favor of the motion, despite Jungkook, the leader of the Jungkook Innovation Party, losing his seat after he was sentenced to jail for academic bribery and fraud. He was succeeded by Park Sun-hee, who is also in favor of impeachment. If the National Assembly approves the motion, the final decision on impeachment will then be determined by the Constitutional Court. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Police authorities are now looking directly into President Yoon as they review the possibility of seeking an arrest warrant for the president and a search warrant for his residence, as well as access to his digital records. Our Pei Yoon-ji has this report.
Investigations into insurrection charges are now closing in on President Yoon as the probe into the brief imposition of martial law escalates here in the country. The police investigation team is not only seeking to summon him for questioning, but is also looking into requesting an arrest warrant, as well as a search warrant for the president's residence in Central Seoul. During a press briefing by the police special investigation team on Friday, an official said that they're also considering requesting a warrant to seize President Yoon's communication records. On Wednesday, the police tried to raid the presidential office but failed to get inside even with a search warrant after security guards refused to cooperate. After an hours-long standoff at the gates, the investigators had to leave and were able to receive only a limited number of documents through voluntary submission. Police will likely continue to carry out a compulsory investigation into the president, as they have deemed Yoon as a suspect, based on the evidence they've gathered so far, in a rare investigation into a sitting president for insurrection charges. Separately, the police have also obtained a secured phone of the country's police agency chief, Cho Ji-ho. The investigation team says President Yoon called him by phone 6 times, ordering the arrest of lawmakers on the night martial law was declared last week. In another separate investigation by the prosecutors, a request for an arrest warrant was made for the chief of the military's counterintelligence command, Yeo In-hyung, suspected of carrying out a key role when the martial law was in place. He's alleged to have been given orders to send troops into the National Assembly to arrest key opposition party lawmakers, and to send troops to the National Election Commission to obtain servers. Meanwhile, the legal team representing former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun said Friday that President Yoon's decision to declare martial law was not an insurrection, as it was within the president's constitutional rights. The team also went on to claim that attempting to investigate the case itself is an insurrection, and added the ex-defense chief plans to join the president in his fight to protect the Constitution. Kim was formally arrested on insurrection charges on Wednesday after being named as the mastermind behind last week's failed imposition of martial law. 배은지, Arirang News.
Protests have been making headlines here in the country amid the political turmoil. And this time, the focus has been on something unique, such as K-pop and light sticks. Our An Sung-jin was out and about.
Peaceful yet passionate, festive but serious. These somewhat contradicting words accurately represent the scene of recent political protests in South Korea. Candlelit protests had already garnered a lot of attention from the protests back in 2016. But following a then lawmaker's statement that candles go out when the wind blows, this time protesters found another way to convey their message: K-pop and light sticks. It's merchandise used by fans to cheer for their favorite idols. And with these, the atmosphere at these political rallies has changed.
What you're seeing behind is row after row of protesters with light sticks, chanting messages while singing along to K-pop songs. At night, the weather is well below zero, but the heat from these rallies is a powerful symbol that signifies solidarity.
A new protest culture has emerged, and it's being embraced by different age groups, but led by those in their 20s and 30s.
I felt bad that I didn't come immediately after the martial law declaration because of school, so as soon as it was over, I came straight away.
I'm in my 50s and I can really see that protests change a lot over time, which is touching. It's meaningful that a lot of young people have been leading these protests in a very peaceful manner, yet also being very vocal at the same time.
One expert says that K-pop helps give people a voice.
For these people, light sticks are a very precious item to them. The fact that they bring them out here means that they think of these rallies as a safe space where one can voice themselves while expressing uniqueness.
Alongside light sticks and chants, banners with quirky names or slogans were also there to demonstrate that it's ordinary people who are showing signs of support.
Last week's news was really shocking, the martial law announcement, and then I'm glad that it's all peaceful so far. No violence and no soldiers on the streets.
This non-violent method of protest is only one aspect of democratic citizenship, or a sense of civic consciousness despite the political turmoil. During these rallies, supporters were seen prepaying for meals or drinks at cafes and nearby restaurants. Though protests take place to express political dissent, the scenes of them instead show harmony, unity across generations, and consideration for each other. An Song-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, what has been the impact of Korea's short-lived martial law on its tourism sector? Our Yoon answers this question.
From January to October this year, South Korea welcomed almost 14 million foreign tourists, recovering 94% of the visitors seen in the same period of 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic. However, President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law on December 3rd has had an impact on the travel industry. An official from a hotel near the National Assembly in Yeouido told a local news agency that on the day after the declaration of martial law, the cancellation rate was 44% higher than the December average. The Four Seasons Hotel Seoul usually has 60 to 70% of its bookings from foreign tourists. After the martial law declaration, the hotel received over 100 inquiries. Although the actual cancellation rate was low, a hotel official said that bookings for December remain uncertain. In response, the South Korean government has acted to minimize the effect on the tourism industry. The Culture Ministry has asked the tourism industry to inform other countries that tourist sites are operating as usual. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also sent a note to foreign missions in Korea, assuring them that daily life remains unchanged and therefore there is no need to adjust travel advisories.
As the government works on these efforts, let's take a moment to hear from tourists already in Korea. How are they experiencing the situation? Let's find out.
We started planning our honeymoon like
8 months ago.
Nine, maybe
yeah,
9
months ago.
And Korea was always on our wish list. So we decided to go to Korea. We were gonna wait to hear like for the big news, and then we're going to the site. But we thought everything is normal, so we decided to come.
We just arrived today, and everything seems perfect, and yeah, we're happy.
And amazing.
Yeah.
For those visiting Korea for the second time, their understanding of the protest culture and safety concerns didn't stop them from returning.
Well, this is my second time to Korea, and this year I bring along my family, my wife and my kids.
Yeah, here we feel like home actually. Yeah, I feel excited, and this is one of my dream country that I want to go.
I mean, it happened a few days before I was supposed to fly, and I definitely had to keep an eye on the situation. But I wasn't too worried because I've experienced protesting in Korea before, and I know it's a very, very safe place to be. So,
while it's uncertain how long the current instability will last, efforts are being made to ensure the safety and well-being of all citizens, residents, and visitors alike who are seeking the same peace and security during their time in South Korea. Yoon, Arirang News.
Economic perception has been not so good amid the political risks at home and risk factors but beyond borders. Moon Hye-ryun explains.
The South Korean government has raised concerns over potential economic downturn risks, highlighting a decline in consumer and business confidence. That's according to the latest Economic Green Book, a monthly economic assessment report released by the Finance Ministry on Friday. The first report to be released since the martial law incident last Tuesday states that while inflation remains under control, growing domestic and international uncertainties could further dampen economic sentiment, raising the likelihood of economic risks contributing to an economic slowdown. The report reflects a darker outlook compared to the previous month, with the term gradual economic recovery omitted and replaced with concerns about growing uncertainty.
The only official data we have is on industrial activity from October, and there isn't enough preliminary data to make an accurate judgment about the current economic situation. We asked ourselves, what is the most accurate word to describe the current economic situation? We also reviewed past Green Book assessments from similar situations in the past.
Although terms like martial law or impeachment crisis were not explicitly mentioned, the government noted that the prolonged political turmoil is likely to cause households to tighten spending and businesses to slow down investment. The report also revealed weak domestic recovery trends, with private consumption up only 0.5% from the previous quarter in the third quarter of the year. Retail sales in October showed a mixed picture, with non-durable goods and semi-durable goods showing a rise in sales, while durable goods saw a significant decline month-on-month. Additionally, October's facility investment and construction figures showed negative growth, signaling persistent challenges in the economy. However, export performance remained stable, with November's exports increasing by 1.4% year-on-year. This marks the 14th consecutive month of positive growth. The government emphasized that despite geopolitical risks, global economic recovery remains intact, but further uncertainties, particularly in trade environments, continue to pose challenges. Moving forward, the government plans to maintain strong international credibility while reinforcing efforts to support economic stability and strengthen industrial competitiveness. During an emergency economic meeting on Friday, finance authorities reported a conference call with 3 major international credit rating agencies to note the strong fundamentals of South Korea's economy. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Big increases in exports from the 10 top South Korean companies have driven the rise of total exports in the third quarter due to robust chip shipments. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, the trade concentration of the 10 firms accounted for over 37% of the country's total exports, up about 3 percentage points from the previous year. It's the highest level in 6 years. Meanwhile, total exports during the July to September period rose by more than 10% year-on-year, exceeding over $173 billion. Jungkook of K-pop sensation BTS won 2 awards at the 2024 Billboard Music Awards, one of 3 major music award ceremonies in the U.S. Jungkook received on Thursday local time the Top K-pop Album and Top Global K-pop Song Awards for his first solo album, Golden, and the lead-off track, Standing Next to You. He was honored as a solo artist and has now received Billboard Music Awards for 2 years in a row, winning Top Global K-pop Song for the Single 7 last year. Jungkook has been on active military service since December last year. The African Development Bank believes prospects are high for broader productive ventures between South Korea and the African continent, especially in light of an inaugural summit hosted by Seoul this past summer. Our Shin Ha-young had a chance to talk to its chief.
It's been a half a year since the Korea-Africa Summit, and the African Development Bank is looking forward to building on the outcomes of recent cooperation between the two sides. That's what President Akinwumi Adesina of the African Development Bank said during an interview at the Africa Investment Forum. Agreeing to launch a high-level dialogue on expanding cooperation in the supply chain of critical minerals was one of the key outcomes.
Africa shouldn't be exporting those as raw materials, because that is the direct door to poverty. We need to make sure then that Africa is able to process, add value, and to these critical minerals and move up the value chain. Now, Korea, this is where Korea comes in. Korea is again supporting us through the Korea Trust Fund to do critical analysis and assessments of how we might be able to set up lithium-ion battery, precursor battery manufacturing plants in Africa.
In terms of agricultural development, along with technology transfer, South Korea's K-Rice Belt Initiative has been a perfect fit for the so-called Reward Program, a $650 million initiative by the AfDB to improve food security in West Africa.
Korea is also helping us on something very important, which is in helping with the use of drone technology for agriculture, and using those drones to be able to monitor temperature, to be able to monitor climate, whether it's moisture, to be able to also monitor pests and diseases. And so that technology transfer is happening a lot from Korea.
Meanwhile, ahead of Donald Trump's second term, with many countries closely watching his America First policies, President Adesina believes the partnership with the U.S., especially in critical minerals, will continue.
Africa is a great trading partner with the United States. President Biden went to Africa, paid his first visit to Africa, and went to Angola. And on the Lobito corridor, back to the issue of the critical minerals that you were saying. And so I expect that the partnership on critical metals will be big and continue with the United States. United States is our second largest contributor to the African Development Bank, and I believe that will continue and probably will be even much stronger under the new president.
Celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, the president reflected not only on the growth of the AfDB's capital, which evolved from an initial $250 million to $318 billion, but also on its impact on the continent's development.
If you ask me what has really changed with African Development Bank since 1960, I would say today we are at the center of Africa's development. In the last 7-8 years that we've been running these high fives in Africa, is that if we've impacted on 500 million people, from water to sanitation access, to transport access, to energy access, to food security and all of that, and private sector as well. So that's how the bank has become today.
He described the past 6 decades as phenomenal, adding that the needs of Africa are immense and that working in partnerships is crucial. 신하영, Arirang News, Rabat.
Over in Sweden, Nobel Week 2024 came to a close on Thursday, leaving behind unforgettable moments for many in Korea, as author Kang received the Nobel Prize in Literature. For this week's Arts and Culture segment, our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin walks us through the highlights of the week-long celebrations.
The first Asian female Nobel laureate in literature, only the second Korean Nobel Prize winner. It's no surprise that Kang was the star of Nobel Week 2024. Han began the week by visiting the Nobel Prize Museum following the long-standing tradition of laureates donating a personal artifact. She chose a teacup that she used throughout the writing of her latest novel, We Do Not Part.
Every time I sat back down at my desk, I would drink black tea from this cup. It became like a spell, drawing me back to my writing. I felt it was the perfect object to share my creative process.
Her first press conference after winning the Nobel Prize also drew a great deal of attention. Han's response to Korea's brief martial law imposition resonated deeply as it reminded many of her 2014 novel Human Acts, which explores the 1980 Gwangju democratization movement under military control.
Witnessing martial law unfold again in 2024 was shocking. I saw people trying to stop armored vehicles with their bodies, others holding back soldiers with their hands, and some standing firm against advancing troops with guns. As the soldiers withdrew, some called out, "Take care," like they were saying goodbye to their sons. I could feel their sincerity and courage.
The day after was her Nobel lecture, often regarded as the laureate's acceptance speech. The author expressed her gratitude to readers for connecting with her through what she called the golden thread of language.
그 생생한 감각들을 전류처럼 문장들에 불어넣으려 하고 그 전류가 읽는 사람들에게 전달되는 것을 느낄 때면 놀라고 감동합니다. 언어가 우리를 잇는 실이라는 것을.
The following evening, Han's words were once again heard during the Nobel Literature Night. Excerpts from We Do Not Part were recited in Korean.
밀도가 얼마나 낮은 눈인지 내가 앉는 대로 끝없이 깊게 꺼져내렸다. 격벽 같은 눈이 우리를 갈라놓았다.
It was truly a meaningful and touching moment to hear Hangang's beautiful prose in Korean here in Sweden.
In times like this, as Hangang mentioned in her lecture, I hope it becomes a moment for all of us to reflect on the pain and love between humans.
Yeah, it's the history that we all have in us through our forefathers. You can't really escape it, and you have to talk about it and read about it, and to understand yourself and your family and existence, actually. So in that way, I can relate to it a lot.
And then came Nobel Day. Hangang became the first Korean to walk down the Nobel Prize's blue carpet at Stockholm Concert Hall. Korea's first Nobel Prize winner, former President Kim Dae-jung, received his Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. During the banquet, Han delivered her speech of thanks with a pleasant surprise beforehand. The host introduced her to the podium in Korean.
올해 노벨 문학상 수상자를 소개하게 되어 영광입니다.
Han's speech focused on the role of literature in times of darkness, offering great comfort to many in Korea during a time of political and social uncertainty.
Language that connects us one another. Literature that deals in this language inevitably holds a kind of body heat. Just as inevitably, the work of reading and writing literature stands in opposition to all acts that destroy life.
The next day, during a meetup with the Korean media, Han showed a lighter side, recalling a special memory from her time in Stockholm.
Unibacken is a sort of theme park inspired by Astrid Lindgren's works that she was directly involved in designing and creating. During my first visit to Stockholm, my Swedish editor recommended it during my 3 free hours. This time they gave me a lifetime free pass, which was a fun and touching gift.
For the grand finale of her Nobel Week, Hangang surprised her readers with an unplanned recital of her novel Greek Lessons in front of an audience of around 700 at the Royal Dramatic Theatre's Nobel Reading with Hangang event. With the celebrations now behind her, Han says she's ready to write again.
I'll now return to my daily life and quietly focus on working hard on my next book. I'd appreciate your support.
So the Nobel Week 2024 has come to a close, but the arc of Hangang's story hasn't reached its climate just yet. We'll now wait for what the Nobel laureate has in store for her readers here in Stockholm, to Seoul, and around the world. 송진, Arirang News, Stockholm.
With cold winds, it feels much colder than the actual readings in Seoul today. It is expected to get colder as the temperatures drop, so please dress extra warm. Meanwhile, the Chungcheongdo provinces, the Jeollado provinces, and Jeju Island are currently having a mixture of snow and rain. Heavy snow of 1 to 2 centimeters per hour will be concentrated in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island, where a heavy snow warning is issued, as well as in the inland areas of southern parts of Chungcheongnam-do province and the eastern parts of Jeollabuk-do province. Up to 30 centimeters of snow will fall on Ulleung-do and Dokdo Islands, and up to 10 in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island, and up to 5 to 7 centimeters in the Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daejeon will start off at -4 degrees, Daegu -2 degrees. Highs will move up to 5 in Daejeon and Gwangju, Jeju 9 degrees. Seoul will plummet to -4 degrees Celsius this weekend, and it will feel as cold as -7 degrees. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if you've signed a contract for a one room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
Presiding over Monday's cabinet meeting following his latest diplomatic agenda in New York, President Yoon South Korea's economy will grow. The central bank has kept its key interest rate unchanged.
Mission complete. Foreign rocket booty South Korea.
Seoul is rallying in hopes of bringing the World Expo 2030.
Arirang.
K-drama, the charm of Korea that captivates the world. Love like a K-drama. A story of us where hope and despair coexist. Fun and refreshingly satisfying. K-dramas carry warmth and move people's hearts. Meet the fascinating stories of Korea through K-dramas.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. South Korea's economy faces growing uncertainty following President Yoon Suk-yeol's brief martial law declaration and the subsequent ongoing impeachment efforts leading to increased market volatility. The Finance Ministry's latest report warns that while inflation remains under control, domestic and global risks could dampen economic sentiment. Amid this, opposition lawmakers passed the drastically reduced 2025 budget of $471.5 billion, cutting funds for key government operations, including the presidential office and national security. This budget squeeze raises concerns about the government's ability to manage state affairs in the coming year. For a deeper discussion on this, we're joined by Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Welcome, Professor.
Hello.
And also joining us from Chicago is Greg Buchak at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Great to have you with us, Professor.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with Professor Buchak. Amid rising concerns over the political situation here in South Korea, how do you assess the immediate economic impact of the recent martial law and the political crisis?
Sure. Well, as you know, I think sort of the remaining uncertainty is mostly around kind of the political process of what happens next to President Yoon and the outcome of the impeachment vote, kind of in contrast to what might have been a much deeper crisis around the fundamental stability of sort of South Korean democratic institutions at the time that martial law was declared. So, in some sense, I think you can see this as the rule of law working as intended. It's a little chaotic, there's some volatility, but I think this situation is much better than the alternative. Economists have sort of shown that, having stable political institutions, they're very important for economic growth. And kind of the basic idea there is, businesses want to know that contracts will be enforced, courts of law will work, the government won't expropriate private business. And if there's a sign of these sort of basic institutions breaking down, that's really bad news for the economy. When the crisis first started and sort of right in the immediate aftermath, markets were sort of trying to figure out whether it would really be kind of this worst case scenario where Korean institutions sort of broke down. And as a result, this was unfolding live. There was a lot of volatility in equity markets and foreign exchange markets, just as sort of the world was trying to figure out what was going on. But it really seems like this worst case hasn't materialized. The impeachment process is working through kind of normal democratic channels. There's some uncertainty around what's going to come out, but I would sort of characterize that more of like the same uncertainty you would get with an election rather than a sort of fundamental question about whether the rule of law will be followed.
Now let's also ask Professor Yang's opinion. Cho Dong-cheol, the president of the Korea Development Institute, said on December 11th that the negative impact of the martial law and the impeachment crisis on the economy is limited and will not last long. And this goes in line with Professor Buchak's statements. Would you agree to them?
I would agree partially. I think any negative effect from the martial law itself has pretty much disappeared. Now, during martial law, it really didn't affect anything about the real economy, production and exports. Factories were not shut down. People were not arrested. No one was hurt. So in terms of at least the real economy, there was nothing from the martial law to really affect the real economy side. But I think all the danger now comes from the political side. Because the impeachment vote did not take place, there's real question on the legal standing for President Yoon. Even though the party and the army said that they would no longer take orders from President Yoon, legally all the powers still rest with him. So I think there's a real confusion on where the leadership is and what the legal standing is. And right now, the political conflict between the ruling and opposition party is growing. Now, if we can get this problem sorted out quickly, then I think the risk will be minimized and there will be little effect from the martial law declaration. But if the political confusion goes on, then as the longer it takes for the political problem to be solved, the bigger problem it will be. It will eventually affect the real economy, production, and export side as well. Having said that, even if the problems from the martial law and the political problems go away, Korean economy was not in a very solid place to begin with before the martial law. So even if we go back to sort of the pre-martial law normality, it will still mean a pretty gloomy outlook for the Korean economy.
Then what about elsewhere? Professor Buchak, how much do you think the latest political turmoil could impact foreign companies and investors from overseas?
Sure. I mean, if you're a foreign company, foreign investor, even a tourist coming to Korea, you want to know that when you do business in Korea or interact with a Korean company, will the contract you signed be enforced? Will the ownership right you have in some asset be respected? Will the Korean economy remain healthy? Will it be safe for you to travel here? And I think over the longer term, Americans and a lot of foreigners in Korea definitely see South Korea as like a very stable liberal democracy. There's a big reason that there's so much trade and partnership between our countries. Businesses have been willing to invest, they're willing to sign these long-term contracts. They do that because they think there's a sort of stable legal institutions backing these agreements. So, when this martial law crisis occurred, it was very surprising for a lot of us overseas to see pictures of army vehicles in the streets of Seoul. And, for those couple hours, I think a lot of people were really wondering, like, what's gonna happen. Fortunately, as Professor Yoon said, sort of like the worst case scenario didn't materialize, and now sort of what's left on the table is a lot of political uncertainty, and we're not quite sure how long that's going to last. I will sort of highlight what I think is, from a very outsider's perspective, what I sort of saw as a silver lining here is, yes, the president declared martial law, but the legislature was able to unanimously vote against it. And I think kind of amazingly, the president and the army went along with that vote. I don't think you can take that sort of deferring to the legislature, deferring to sort of the democratic process as something, I don't think we can take that for given. And I think that's sort of a good sign for the ability of the Korean system to work through this crisis.
Right. So now, meanwhile, we will talk to Professor Yang about the domestic stock market now. It has been fluctuating following President Yoon's public address on Thursday after showing slight signs of recovery following the martial law crisis. Now, how would you forecast the future direction of the stock market?
Okay, well, it has been surprisingly going up for the last 3 days. I did not expect the stock market to go up so soon after the martial law. I did expect the shock to go down, but it sort of did better than I think a lot of people, including myself, expected. Having said that, though, if you look at who's buying and selling the stocks, right now, Korean individual investors are selling the stocks and Korean institutions are buying the stocks. Foreigners are still leaving, though they're not leaving as quickly as what a lot of people feared. So in some sense, the stock market is recovering, but it's still very shaky. I'm not sure if we completely have the foreign investors' confidence yet. But again, even before the martial law, Korean stock market was not performing very well. And during shocks like this, it's natural that you have flight to safety. And in this case, flight to safety means U.S. dollars and non-Korean foreign bonds, bonds and stocks. So I think it's not really a big surprise that a lot of foreign investors have left Korea for safer stocks, at least for now. But the question is, when will they come back? And until the political uncertainty has cleared up, I'm not sure if there's a lot of incentive for foreign investors to come back. So it may be a while before we see the stock market being completely stable again.
Right, so it would be crucial for us to regain trust among individual and foreign investors. Now, lately, South Korea's currency has shown some volatility as it depreciated sharply against the dollar. It's still showing signs of uncertainty as of the moment. Professor Buchak, how would you gauge the impact of the political situation to have affected exchanges?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of like Professor Yoon said, the broader context here is the won has been losing value to the dollar pretty steadily for the past few years, especially since last October. And sort of if you zoom out, you know, the devaluation in the wake of the martial law declaration, it's not really an outsized move in the context of that larger trend. So I think there's even one story here, which is, you know, the economic sort of situation in Korea put pressure on the president, and that's actually sort of what led to discontentment with his leadership and ultimately the declaration of martial law. Given that the martial law was sort of short-lived, you sort of might interpret this whole situation as sort of the economic situation causing the political crisis rather than the other way around. But sort of, you know, like back to currencies, a very simple explanation for why currencies move up and down is they sort of depreciate when the economy's lagging. If there's less demand for Korean goods, especially domestically, people need fewer won to buy them, and so the value declines. Markets also expect interest rates to decrease. Political instability per se can lead to these declines, and if there's a concern, for example, that sort of the government may not be able to repay its debt, and until sort of this sort of gets resolved, I think you're going to see this currency depreciation sort of stick around.
Right, so this depreciating currency has been going on even before the martial law. Then you've mentioned it's going to stick around. There are concerns about whether this high exchange rate will persist. What are your forecasts, and what potential repercussions should we prepare for?
Sure, I mean, I think the longer term context here is the won has just been losing value relative to the dollar for a long time. Part of this is about the strength of the Korean economy. Part of this is about the strength of the U.S. economy and relative moves by the Fed and the Korean Central Bank. In terms of a forecast, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about sort of when this political crisis in Korea will resolve. I think there's also a lot of uncertainty around what policies Trump will pursue when he takes office in January. The details of his tariff plans, for example, they could have a very large impact. And until we see actually what's in them, and unfortunately with him, we often don't sort of know what we're going to get until he decides. It could be hard to say, but we'll get there. You know, weak currency tends to be a sign of economic weakness, but it's sort of good and bad depending on who you are. If you're someone who wants to travel internationally or consume a lot of foreign goods, or if you're a business that imports foreign goods, this is bad for you. But on the other hand, Korean exporters, people who want to work for Korean exporters, a weak currency means Korean goods are relatively cheaper for foreigners, and on the margin, that's beneficial for them. So there's some pros and cons of this.
Right. Thank you for the clear explanation on that part. Now, South Korea's foreign exchange authorities hinted that they would intervene to lower exchange rate volatility and take strong action to it. Professor Young, what kind of measures could they take, and what is the foreseen impact?
Okay, well, ideally, they would stick to reducing volatility. Right now, the exchange rate is very volatile. So let's take two problems separately. You have the volatility where the exchange rate changes a lot in a day, in a week. Then we have another problem, which is that the Korean won is right now valued very low. I think we should separate those two problems. Volatility, I think there's a room for government to maneuver right now because of the political turmoil. Depending on what the president says, depending on what the politician says, we see very high fluctuation in the exchange rate. And I think the government and the Bank of Korea do have justification to go after those temporary short peaks and troughs. But if you wanted to deal with the weak value of the Korean won, I think that might be waste of resources in some sense. As Professor Buchak mentioned, a lot of this is because of the current medium-term fundamentals, the Trump risk, the tariff risk, as well as the weak Korean economy. You can't really turn that around with government intervention in the currency market. And if we just try to work against the market, then we might just throw away a lot of our foreign exchange reserves on a task which is basically impossible. So in some sense, we should reserve the bullets, fight the fights that we can sort of win, concentrate on volatility, especially political volatility, so that the won does not jump around too much. But for now, I think we have to face the fact that at least for the next 3 to 6 months, we'll have a Korean exchange rate being around 1,400 to 1,410 won per dollar.
Right, but we can still expect some changes on the volatility part. The National Assembly recently passed a revised national budget that cuts 4.1 trillion won. This is roughly 2.9 billion US dollars from the government's initial proposal. How do you think these cuts, especially to the reserve fund and special activity expenses, will affect South Korea's short-term and long-term, Professor Yang?
Okay, well, I think we should separate the macroeconomic effect and the microeconomic effect. The microeconomic effect, depending on the programs that they've cut, it will obviously mean that some programs cannot be fulfilled. That's going to be a problem for some ministries and some programs. But the total government spending in the budget was originally 677 trillion won. About 4.3 trillion won was cut. That's less than 1% of the budget. It's about 0.16% of expected nominal GDP next year. So macroeconomics-wise, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact. What does worry me a little bit is that a lot of money was cut from the reserves, and what the reserve in the budget does is it's sort of insurance. In case there's a big emergency, in case there's a national disaster, or if the country goes into a recession that's more serious than we expected, then they can use that fund from the reserves to try to quickly pick up the economy. But if you cut money from the reserves, then you obviously don't have the resources to do that. You will have to form a supplementary budget, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but the problem is that takes time. The budget size as a whole, I'm not particularly worried about that, the 4 trillion won being cut, but there's the reduction in reserves does bother me a little bit. But on the other hand, Korean budget has been rising very quickly in the last 5 years or so. So this hopefully may lead to a slower growth path for government budget and perhaps a smaller deficit than what we've seen in the last few years.
Right, so just as you mentioned, the opposition stated that if necessary, additional funds can be allocated through the supplementary budgets. But now there has been controversy over the government's fiscal soundness. How would you view the government's financial capacity in this regard?
Okay, well, the expected growth in nominal GDP is 4.5%, and the rise in spending was 3.2%. So a lot of people are arguing that this is in some sense a contractionary move on the budget. But on the other hand, if we just look at the inflation, then the expected inflation next year is about 2.3%. So it does represent increase in funds. Even with the budget cut, I think this will be the biggest nominal spending that Korea has seen for the annual budget. So it's not a small budget by any means. Originally, when the government formulated this budget, they expected a 2.9% deficit against the GDP. So this was right around the sort of the upper limit that the government has set for itself. They wanted to institute a budget rule that deficit cannot go above 3% of GDP. But again, I think hopefully the cut in budget will start a trend so that the government can start reducing the deficit and reduce the debt. Korean government debt, while it's not that bad by advanced country standards, has been going up at an alarming speed in the last few years, and it'll go faster because of the demographic trend that Korea has. And hopefully they will learn to, because some of the reserve funds as well as some programs are cut, hopefully the government will start using this money more wisely.
Right, and before we let you go to Professor Buchak, what kind of policy measures do you think the South Korean government should adopt to stabilize the economy in the short term and regain public and investor confidence given this current situation?
I mean, I really think the number one most important thing for them to do is just resolve this political crisis as quickly as possible, get a stable government in place, take questions about who's in charge off the table. And that's really first order questions of economic stimulus and so on. I think, as Professor Yoon mentioned, it's sort of a small fraction of the overall Korean budget, and the stable institutions is really number one.
All right. We'll have to wrap up our discussion now. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Buchak and Professor Yang. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
K-drama, the charm of Korea that captivates the world. Love like a K-drama. A story of us where hope and despair coexist. Fun and refreshingly satisfying. K-dramas carry warmth and move people's hearts. Meet the fascinating stories of Korea through K-dramas.
How to survive in Korea. Cafes. Step 1. Find a seat. Before ordering, find a seat. Laptop ID, smartphone, jacket, whatever that can mark your territory. But no bites. It's a little too big. Step 2. Pick up. We do not ask or call your name. We call out, B69 고객님. The buzzer will vibrate when your order is ready at the counter. Wait, got your straw? Keep the top of the wrapper on. Doing this is more hygienic. Step 3. Cafe etiquette. If you need to use your laptop, find a seat